podcast. My name is Kay Hill. I'm your host today, and I have a wonderful guest with me, Ray Wilson. She's a senior HR business partner from Bridgestone, and I wanted to tap into her expertise on our ethical topic today, which is stack ranking or forced ranking. So, Ray, thanks for joining me. And if you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your experience, I would appreciate that.
Thank you, Kay, and it's my pleasure to join you today. I've been in HR. I transitioned from operations to HR in 1999, so I've been in HR for, I guess, 25 years now. But I've worked in manufacturing, in retail, in corporate headquarters, and partnered with legal a great deal. Through many situations where we've used stack ranking. And the two applications I'm most familiar with are the RIF situation, where you're reducing your workforce and you need to identify your lowest performers and make sure that, that's the group that you impact. And then I've used it during the performance cycle. And in that case, I've not been as pleased with the outcome, because it's less objective and more subjective in that scenario.
And if you're dealing with people that aren't really skilled or understand exactly how it should be used, and of course that's a little more challenging.
Absolutely. Operators, and I've learned operators are a bit emotional. And they're also, what have you done for me lately? So a lot of times they won't take the full breadth of knowledge of that teammate. They'll only look at the last 3 months or the last 6 months for their performance. And that's not quite fair to our teammates.
No, it's not. Well, and that's why I think this can be an ethical dilemma. And when I was thinking about this, it's like, okay, well, let's go to the research and see what there is out there in the literature. And I found a few phrases that from different studies and peer-reviewed articles. I just want to read them to you and get your thoughts on what these researchers are telling us.
Sure.
So the first one, it's from Casby et al., and it's out of the Journal of Economic Psychology. And that group found that invoking social comparison to improve performance by ranking employees is problematic. So my thoughts are social comparison is the problem.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
That?
I think a lot of operators, they are comparing, and what they deem as important is a lot more around how does that employee treat them versus what's their performance like. So meaning that employee that's very good at the political savvy, managing up, or their supervisor, they're very good at that. They may rank higher than they probably would be for just a standard stack ranking, because we have a tendency to rank people we like higher than people we don't like.
Right. And then there's no objectivity there. It's all
no objectivity, and the door opens for legal to have fun with, where that employee fell in the stack ranking. And if you take an adverse employment action, and you've used no metrics in that stack ranking, it really can get to be a legal quagmire to dig your way out of. And it's not fun.
I would imagine not. Absolutely. Okay, so our next quote is from Rubin and Edwards, and they were in the International Journal of Human Resource Management. And they found that forced rankings are a short-term answer. If outsiders join the organization, internal candidate morale can be impacted, and employees may see forced ranking as unfair and inaccurate.
I would agree. If they ever got their hands on forced ranking, they would very well think that, because everybody thinks they're number one. Luckily, in my past experience using force ranking, it was never something that we shared with employees. So I feel like organizations know, you know, the amount of trouble it can cause with the employee morale, because almost every organization that I've used that does not share that information. And even we don't use uh, stack ranking here at Bridgestone. We use the 9-box, which
Mhm.
forces everybody into some form of ranking, but it's not at least just come up with your list. And I think that when we go through that exercise, which we do during the performance review cycle, um, we talk a lot about this is confidential. We don't share that information for those very reasons, the morale. I think that stack ranking is only as good as the effort to put it together goes. And also, I agree with that statement that new employees are constantly shifting and moving that
Mhm.
stack ranking based on where they are in their performance. You know, if a brand new employee comes in and just, um, rocks it out at a store, we may rank them very high. And the very next year, because they, you know, we've learned more about them, they may fall in the middle of the pack where they probably should have been to the beginning. But we're so excited that they're turning a store around. We rank them high automatically. We give them credit that they probably haven't earned yet.
Right, and then sustaining that could be difficult for that employee.
Yeah,
And they
yeah,
see what they're really capable of.
absolutely
Mhm.
100% agree with
Yeah.
that.
Well, I think the 9-box, it takes away some of that, the social aspect that we talked about with the last quote, and spreads it out so it makes a little
Well, I think the
more
nine
sense.
box has its own issues. At least with
Agree?
my team, they get tripped up on the titles, and if we had left it just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I think I would have less problems with that. But a lot of my guys really like the title "Diamond in the Rough."
Mhm.
But when you look at the definition, it's virtually impossible to be a diamond in the rough, but they love that title. So I think every tool has its pros and its cons.
I would agree with that for sure. All right, so another quote that I had from Sun et al. Out of the International Journal of Human Resource Management again. Um, they found that forced ranking may generate thoughts of preferential treatment, discrimination, and a low level of fairness in the organization.
And that's why I don't like to use it during the performance review cycle. I think that what makes stack ranking a good tool is when you have many stakeholders that are involved in building the forced ranking.
Hmm.
Meaning, you identify anywhere from 5 to 7 metrics that everybody is graded on, and it may be productivity, interview. When I did this before, and we used it during a riff, we had to interview everyone too. And so we
Mm.
had productivity, we had interview, we had, attendance, because it was in a manufacturing facility where attendance is huge. It had a lot of different aspects. It had tenure, and all of those were agreed upon by our legal department, HR, and operations to give a full picture of the employee. During the performance review cycle, you're lucky if the team will use the performance review as part of the metrics, for their stack ranking. So I think that's why I'm much more comfortable using stack ranking when you put the upfront work in to build a good stack rank.
Okay. That all makes sense. And it seems like with so many errors that can occur during the performance review process in and of itself, the recency effect, the halo effect, all of those different buzzwords that
100%.
we know, that can just skew the whole thing to begin with before we even start.
Or, a performer could have a bad year,
Mhm.
but they're a good leader, but they've had a bad year with their metrics. So, and operators are, what have you done for me lately? They only want to look at what's your performance like right now,
Mhm.
not historical performance.
Yeah, the whole employee, the holistic approach. Yeah.
Yes.
So one more quotation I found from the literature. It's from Wang and Chen out of the Frontiers in Psychology. And this reads, employees may see force ranking influenced by those well-versed in political skills, which you mentioned earlier, versus actual performance and respond with counterproductive work measures. So that's about employees responding negatively if they feel like it's all political, it sounds like.
And if they had access to some sort of stack ranking, they would probably say that, because human nature is we're drawn to people that like us, and the
Right.
politically savvy employees are good at managing up.
Mhm.
And I've seen leaders who are hardcore about performance review. They didn't have a good year, so they're, at the bottom of their stack rank. But if they like somebody, they're going to try and get them up higher.
Mhm.
Even though they had a bad year, and the stack rank says they should be dead last, you know, that manager is like, this person does everything for me, is
Mhm.
really good at, and so they'll move them up. And it's not always, they're just good to that one leader. They're not necessarily good to their employees, or good, for our business. They're just
Mhm.
good at managing up.
And that's certainly a risk, I think,
I
when
think so
we're
too.
looking at stack
I
ranking.
agree with you,
Absolutely.
Kay.
Okay. All right. So I want to work through a scenario that I had with a former employer, just to get your thoughts on it. We can talk about um, who the stakeholders are, and then and analyze the problem and see what we think we should do with respect to stack ranking. So here's the situation. Um, in my former employer, we had an outsized sales group. It was about 105 people across the nation. And they were stack ranked pretty regularly, at least once a quarter. And folks got in a room and they just talked about their people that said 1, 2, 3, 4, here's my list, and really didn't put metrics around it like we've talked about. And I really felt like it was a lot of the things that you've mentioned, the social aspect. Do I get along well with this person? Um, Not necessarily metric based, or at least certainly not fully metric based. So I think we had some potential problems there, and
Hmm.
just wanted to walk through who you might think the stakeholders are in that situation.
I think everybody always thinks about the company as a stakeholder, the leader, the manager as a stakeholder, the
Mhm.
employees a stakeholder, the customer. But one of the things you don't think about when you're going through that is another stakeholder's the teammate's family. How
Yeah.
does that impact them? Does it, is it something that um, impacts their family life? And that can impact their performance. I think also, um, when I think about the stack ranking, I think it's the normal set of stakeholders that most employees have in front of them.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think there's any odd ones, other than I don't think we always consider that family unit as a stakeholder, but they most
Yeah,
definitely are.
I would agree with that. Others that I thought about were the team itself, because if you're a cohesive
Hmm.
team and you're working with a group and someone is removed from that, there's certainly impact there. And with
Yes.
salespeople, also customers, because there's that salesmanship relationship, and the customer is going to say, "Oh, am I going to have a break in service, or am I going to have anybody take this person's place?" And what happens to that relationship? I think
Yeah,
that's
I
probably
would
a
agree
few
with that.
more. Yeah. And then, I kind of see the legal department potentially too, if this goes south.
Oh, 100%. The
Yeah.
legal department, and they play a key role in a well-developed stack rank. When I've used stack ranking during a riff, once we're done with our list and we have identified our low performers, legal does some non-discrimination testing. So they are very heavily involved in stack ranking for RIF.
Mhm. And I think that should be. That's certainly a great approach. And unfortunately, I think organizations don't always include legal, and then ends up picking up the pieces on the other side when an EEOC charge or a lawsuit or something like that happens. So
100%.
that can be huge work for them if it's not handled
Yes.
properly. So what about managers? What do you think is really their piece of as a stakeholder?
I
Risking a
think I
charge? What
think
else?
I think in their mind they're 100%, but
Mhm,
in reality they're probably closer to like 30 to 40% of the picture.
mhm,
Um, and if you want to keep it as objective as possible, you lower that percentage because that's an opinion of the
mhm,
manager. And it can be, it's 100% subjective, but it also can be, you know, littered with biases or, recency effect. All the things we talk
mhm,
about during the performance review cycle can be talked about during stack ranking as well. I
mhm.
talk to a lot of leaders and I'm like, look, we're not here to like everybody, but we're here to be respectful of everybody. And I think that that's a huge pitfall in the stack ranking is it's somewhat of a popularity contest, and if it's not used properly and you have 100% manager opinion for the sole purpose of stack ranking, you really open up the company's exposure to risk.
I think so too, and potentially losing what maybe was a good employee that just wasn't managed properly or something along that line or truly supported. I also see potentially the talent acquisition team being included in stakeholder because if they're going to be the ones that have to backfill a position because of a termination or taking someone out of role, then that impacts them as well as along with trainers that
Yeah,
potentially can.
I would be curious to put all the stakeholders in a RACI model and see, because you're right, talent acquisition, their role is not necessarily to be a part of the ranking, but to
Mhm,
understand the level of risk with those bottom performers. Are some of those bottom performers almost out the door because they're already on some type of documentation? So I would be, I think it would be very helpful if you were going to do a stack rank to also produce a RACI model of who needs to be informed, who needs to own it, you know, legal's participation, where everybody fits in that RACI model of the
mhm.
stakeholders, I think would be very beneficial to if you are going to use the stack rank.
I think that's a great idea. I don't know that people understand the impact of one person being taken out of role or removed from position and how
I
that ripple
agree.
effect can really impact. And my concern is do organizations truly give the person everything they need to give them in order to be successful, or do they just cut bait and say we can find somebody else and move on?
And I
Hopefully,
think
not so
every
much now.
organization's different. I
Mhm,
agree. When do you cut your losses? And
mhm.
when do you say, "Hey, we haven't invested enough in this employee to make that decision yet?"
Right. Okay, well, I think that is all of um, the huge list of our stakeholders, and let's move on to an analysis of the variety of options that we have. So, if we think about continuing stack ranking based on metrics and not on opinion, it sounds to me as if you support that and you think that's a good option.
Yes, I
Mhm.
think that stack ranking has a place in the HR toolkit, 100%, but I don't think um, it should be brought out as often as some organizations bring it out.
I see. Okay. So, and I'm thinking some of those metrics might be sales figures in my example of our outside salespeople, sales figures and percentage of increase and number of customers that we've increased, all of those sorts of metrics. Any other metrics you can think of off the top of your head that might be good to include?
Well, I think if you're in your scenario, if you're doing it quarterly,
Mhm.
you can start to see trends, and you may be able to use the stack rank to for a predictive reason, meaning, oh, I'm looking at this trend with this particular teammate, something's going on. I need to
Mhm.
get a one-on-one with them and talk to them and see what, because people don't come, without outside life. And
Right.
sometimes that outside life can derail a great employee and so I think, if you use it regularly, it may become predictive, and it may even be a great tool to lower turnover if you can nip it in the bud. If
Mhm.
somebody has great performance for 3 years and then the last 3 quarters their performance is falling off, you got to talk to them. You got to find out what's
Mhm.
going on. And it may be, hey, I'm also taking care of an aging parent, or, just some things that we can do to support and help that teammate
Mhm.
manage through, what's going on that's causing this new trend for them.
Well, and it could be something that's FMLA protected and they don't know. If
Mm-hmm.
it's some sort of life event going on. Um, and if nothing has changed in their world with respect to work, they have the same team they're working with, they have the same customer base, and they're going negative quarter after quarter after quarter. There is something going on, and what have we done to help them overcome whatever that may be? I think I would agree with that.
Yep.
So if we continue to stack rank um, people, and then we get in trouble or impacted under Title VII, what sort of things would we be looking at to make sure that we're
So,
not?
and that's why I like the application I agree to and prefer is for RIFs
Mhm.
because of the non-discrimination testing that legal puts your stack rank list through. Kind of limits your exposure. And if there is someone that we're going to um, severance and they fit in that category, legal's prepared to defend it. And with all the metrics, you know, Title VII doesn't say you get to keep your job if you're not performing.
Right.
So having the metrics and having all the data to support the reasons for the reduction in force, I've actually had to use that. We probably 3 or 4 months after a union campaign
Mhm.
did a reduction in force, and we went through the whole process. And when we got the charge from the NLRB, they tried to tie it to union activity, and it was immediately dismissed once we submitted all of our documentation. So having the documentation and having legal review and having all the steps between will limit your exposure and limit the risk to the company. If we were to do that just during performance review cycle without all of the bumper rails to make sure we,
Okay.
stay within our legal limits, it makes this HR professional nervous to do that.
I can certainly understand that, and then you receive the charge as an organization, and you're scrambling to support your position, and you don't already have all that together
Yeah,
ready
and
to
we
go.
had it all and just submitted immediately. Like, we got the charge and we had our response in less than 3 days, and it was
Wow.
dismissed at day 7. So it was just boom, 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 everything lined up, and they didn't even have any questions because our documentation was so solid.
Wow, that's pretty much unheard of, I would think,
Yeah.
in dealing with an agency like that. Very nice. Okay. So if we were to discontinue stack ranking in my scenario, what do you think the impact would be if we just said, we're just not going to do it anymore because we're not using this tool to its best ability because we're just allowing the social piece to continue. We're not including in all the metrics.
I think I currently do a talent review of the top 3 in my region. I think if you have concerns from a legal aspect, you can probably take the top performers in your scenario and build on their skill sets. How are we getting them promoted? How are we developing them to be our future leaders? How are we, enriching their work life by giving them stretch assignments? That would be the only application that I think you could evolve from with the
Mhm.
stack ranking example you had before, is focusing on that top echelon, and then the bottom echelon would be the normal performance management, but not
Mhm.
necessarily using the stack ranking to start that process, but more using the performance eval or the quarterly check-in process to keep tabs on it.
Okay, so not taking any adverse action at all with those bottom performers and investing in them to help bring them up and then focus on the top level.
Well, and I hesitate to say not taking action on the low performers
Mm,
because, you know, no organization can be built and grown with all low performers. You have to
mhm.
address. And if you don't address perform standards, you run the risk of losing your high performers.
Right. Mhm. And
So,
I would
but I
agree with
don't think you take that list and immediately turn it into this is my list of who I'm getting rid of.
that. Mhm.
And I'm
Right.
sorry, I have the hiccups.
Understood. Uh, and when I say take action, I mean severance or
Yes.
just removing them from the company. Absolutely, I think it's an opportunity. What can we do to help them perform better?
Yep.
And I think that is on us as the organization uh, to do that for that employee. But I like the idea of okay, we've got our top ones were folks that we're going to really invest in because they're our next leaders and our next promotions, and sort of flipping that script on how to use that ranking.
Yes.
Sounds like. Yeah, some other things, if we just completely discontinue any sort of stack ranking, I don't know that the organization could remain competitive in the marketplace because, as you said, the top performers are going to go somewhere else where they're going to be recognized. Um, and then I also think we have loss of income to the organization because if we don't do anything with those bottom performers, then they're not going to perform any better. We're not going to be making more money as an organization. So that's certainly not something that we want either.
Yeah, we have a risk to our customer base, excuse me, our customer base and our shareholders. We
Mhm.
didn't talk about one of the stakeholders being our shareholders in our stock,
Mhm.
and they feel that our fiduciary responsibility is to make a profit and pay
Right.
dividends. So,
Mhm.
you know, and we run the risk of losing top performers if we don't address performance issues and losing customer base if we're continuously giving poor service to
Mhm.
our current customers because of low performance.
And I'm also thinking about brand, how that impacts us as a brand. Um, if if potential employees don't see us as a place that nurtures high performance and manages low performance, then are they going to want to come to work for us? And then we lose out on the best candidates if that is out there in the marketplace as well.
I 100%. And we work with a tight knit community, meaning the auto technicians. They all know each other in the city
Mhm.
that they're in, and they know which shops pay the best, which shops have the best benefits, which shops have terrible managers. They know all that. So I agree. That's a great point.
And especially in the smaller towns too, I think that can
Yeah,
be even more impactful.
100%.
And so if you were an HR professional advising this organization within this scenario, what would you recommend to them?
I think that for stack ranking, I would put it up on the shelf and use it judiciously, meaning for reduction in force where it's going to be monitored and have a lot of stakeholders involved. That's the best use of stack ranking, which not, most organizations do not have riffs every year. So that's why I say it may get dusty up there on the shelf, but it'll be fine. And using, more modern tools for performance with the 9 box or some, I've used a talent diamond. There's
Mhm.
lots of different talent tools you can use that give you a better indicator of performance and ranking your people appropriately.
Okay, all right. I think that's great advice. Yeah. Any final thoughts that you have on stack ranking or forced ranking?
Um, I don't like to, because there's all pros and cons with all of the tools we use in HR.
Right?
I don't think that stack ranking is a tool you should throw away. I think it has its purpose, but I don't think it's also a tool to be used for every performance discussion or performance activity. It's one that you use, you know, um, conservatively.
Okay, all right. I, I I think you're right. I think that it does have a purpose, but only if it's used properly and with all the right people involved. Okay. Well, thank you, Ray. I appreciate you spending time with me today on our HR podcast, Sweet and Sour HR, because sometimes it's sweet in HR when we get to give someone a job. Sometimes it's kind of sour when we have to take it away. So I think we have the full gamut in HR, and stack ranking seems to have the full gamut as well. So thank you again for your time. And I appreciate your willingness to share your information.
Thank you, Kay. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you.